G'day, good morning, and happy Wednesday. How you doing today? It's me, it's Alan, and I'm here with another video. So today, what I want to talk to you about is a bit of a follow-on from our cost optimization video back in December, and go into security now. Now, a lot of people have been talking about security recently. Start of the year, new intentions means they want to get involved with different standards, etc. But the first place to start is with well-architected security. Start with the basic foundations of security before you go big. Otherwise, you're going to find there's a lot of work to do later. So what I'm going to go through today is ultimately the basic first step should be taking for security in your AWS account or organization as you start to build and grow, whether you be a startup, whether you be a scale up, or even if you've just started to go into that mid to enterprise level and you've realized things aren't quite in order, you've gone along since you first put that great little project into your first AWS account, and actually you've probably got to get your standards up to whack before you go bigger. So the first step that I would take with security is to separate those workloads. So first step, have a multi-account architecture. This sounds complicated, but it's not. All we're looking for is a couple of AWS accounts, one for your production environment that nobody touches, except for when you put in your deployment into production. Then have another account for playing around, a sandbox, a development account. It doesn't have to be anything hard. And don't forget, you don't actually pay for anything in an AWS account unless you put something in an account. All accounts are free until you start using them. So having that dev account there is great. Also, what it means is if you make mistakes in the development account with data, with your application, you're not going to impact that production workload. So as far as the multi-account architecture is concerned, you've got a production account, you've got a development account, and what you've got next is a management account. This creates a consolidated billing account ultimately above the other two. So you only get one bill. So that's nice and convenient as well. But ultimately, you've separated those workloads out and you're looking after your data security. Then here's your bonus tip for your multi-account architecture: have an audit account. Because when you go for those standards, they're going to look for an audit trail. They're going to look for logging, and they're going to look for how you query that as well. What's an audit account? An audit account is something where you consolidate all your cloud trails into one single place from each of those accounts. So think big, think long term. You've only got a production account and a playground account right now, but what if in 3 years' time, you've actually got an account in London, an account in the US, you've got multiple accounts for different tenancies. You want to consolidate all that logging into one place, because if you have an incident, you want to make sure you can get to that information quickly and easily. And also, it means you've protected that log file as well, because if you do have an incident, nobody can erase those cloud trails from your production account. So there you go. That's your first tip. With a bonus as well. Hey, we're starting off good. My second tip is your network design. Don't just dive in playing with that default VPC configuration that's within your account, because at the end of the day, it's great to get you started, but you don't want to be using a public subnet all the time, which that defaults to VPC is. Create yourself your own custom VPC configuration, and also have 3 layers to it. So in the first layer, you'd have a public subnet. Just put your load balancers there. Anything that needs to be exposed to the internet, but mainly your load balancers. Or maybe you've got a reverse proxy or a VPN server, but that's about it. The second layer to your subnet is going to be a private subnet. I'd put all my compute workloads here, like Lambda functions and EC2 instances, and maybe even Fargate tasks as well. That way, you've separated your compute workload from the internet. Make sure you've got a NAT gateway so those resources can get out to the internet for their updates. But ultimately, the only way into these workloads should be via the load balancer. And then lastly, let's look at the third tier. This is the secure tier, or as I like to call it, the data tier. I put all my managed AWS services here that control my data: RDS, EFS, FSX, and it keeps that data secure. Why is it secure? Well, first of all, it's got no internet gateway and it's got no NAT gateway. There's also a network access control list across the bottom of this as well, which then means you're blocking that from the public subnet. So the only way to get to your data is through the compute layer. So the flow of data starts off at the internet, goes through a load balancer, then comes into your compute layer, and then goes into your data layer if that data request is needed. But there's no way anything compromising your public subnet should be able to get to your data. Step number three, or pointer number three, patch management. If you've got EC2 instances, then make sure you patch them. There's nothing worse than an exposed EC2 instance on the internet. You want to make sure you patch those for any CVEs, good old Windows Patch Tuesdays, but also don't forget your Linux hosts as well. For that, you can use Systems Manager, Maintenance Windows, and Patch Manager. Moving on to point number four now, let's talk about how you log into AWS. Now, the main recommendation at the moment from AWS is to use a single sign-on provider. AWS provides a single sign-on provider in the form of IAM Identity Center. Now, this is great because this means you consolidate all the logins for those multiple accounts that we just created earlier today into one space. And it also means you can federate that off to your favorite identity provider as well, such as Google, Azure AD, or whatever it might be. IAM Identity Center makes sure that you are using temporary credentials at all time. You log in with your identity provider, and then it gives you a fresh new token in the background so you can access all the AWS resources and expires them at approximately 8 to 12 hours, depending on what you've configured. This is great. This means there's no static credentials lying around, nothing that can get leaked, and it even provides you with things like IAM access keys for CLI access. Here's your bonus tip. If you've got access keys set up for service accounts, then make sure we rotate those every 90 days. This is to make sure we reduce the potential of an attack. You can do a scheduled process for this, a business process that is designed to go and rotate those keys and then apply them to the service as well. But make sure you remember to do them every 90 days. My fifth tip is all about the root account. If your root account is still in use, if you're still logging in with that magic email address that Amazon let you register with, get rid of it. At the end of the day, you should be setting a strong password, a hardware MFA token, and locking it away in a safe or something similar to that. Two bonus tips for this particular piece of advice. Make sure that it's got no access keys attached to it either, because access keys, again, are plain text and can be assumed from anywhere. So make sure there's no access keys. And make sure you've got MFA, hardware MFA enabled, not just on your root account, but across your organization as well. Next up, we've got permission management. Now, it's always important to make sure who's got access to what in your environment. I often find that sometimes the managed AWS roles can actually give away too much in terms of permissions. I want my developers to do things. I want them to be productive, but sometimes I don't want them to have access to SageMaker or other services that might be expensive to play with when not properly educated. So look at those permissions, look at what people have, and then make sure you create custom roles and custom permission sets for your staff. Also, make sure you're checking them regularly as well. What if somebody's moved roles? Do they need those permissions still? Top tip and a side tip here, maybe call this a bonus as well. Service control policies can also allow for controlling different permissions and making sure you know who has access to what. You can still maintain the access that they need if they need administrator access to the account, but from a service control policy at an organizational level, you can then limit services and regions. They don't feel like they've been pinned down into an odd IAM permission set, and you feel like you're still in control. It's also great for controlling costs as well. Tip number 7, remote access. When you're remote accessing your EC2 instances, don't use port 22, don't use port 3389. Keep those closed away from the world. Instead, use Systems Manager Session Manager. Session Manager means that you can log on directly to the EC2 instance from inside the AWS Management Console and get your favorite bash prompt or PowerShell prompt. If you're a Windows user and you want to use the GUI, you could also use Fleet Manager instead to get a remote desktop. This way, you can close off port 22, you can close off port 3389 and just access it through the console. From a compliance perspective, this means also that you're logging access to that EC2 instance against CloudTrail, against that user's particular username, making accountability, making them responsible. Bonus tip as well, if you want to track what's going on the command line from Session Manager, you can log those commands to CloudWatch logs as well. Just make sure you probably rotate those logs regularly so they don't get too big. Tip number 8, make sure you've got guard duty enabled. Guard duty is a lifesaver when it comes to not knowing what's going on in your account. I always tell a story about this. Ultimately, where I was previously working, I've seen this with an actual account in real time where guard duty has alerted us to an issue, and what it's alerted to is something that we can't see. It alerted us to an EC2 instance being launched in another region. Now, as a customer, I was working in Sydney. Why would I be bothered about any other region? But guard duty told me that somebody had compromised our accounts by the usage of leaked IAM credentials, and we were able to stop the launch of resources in the wrong region at the wrong time, saving us a lot of money and saving us our security reputation. Bonus tip for this one, Security Hub. Security Hub is a service that consolidates all the security services within AWS into a single pane of glass. Guard duty can alert to Security Hub alongside other services and then show you remediation items as you go along, giving you traffic light reports and even a percentage score of your of your security position. It works with many frameworks, so you'd be able to tune it to exactly what your frameworks might be. Number 9, application protection with a WAF. Ultimately, if you've not got a WAF, you're very possibly opening yourself up to all sorts of risk. A web application firewall, or WAF, can be tuned to your runtime, to your operating systems. It can protect you against the top 10 threats on the internet at the time or against botnets. You can also create custom rules such as whitelists or block lists to be able to basically control what IPs are coming in. And my final tip for security today is encryption. Encrypt everything. As Werner Vogels would say, dance like nobody's watching, encrypt like everybody is. Make sure you encrypt those EBS volumes on creation. Set that setting in the EC2 console to make sure that every volume is encrypted by default. Use custom KMS keys if possible. Make sure S3 buckets are encrypted as well with custom keys, and your RDS instances too. Every service should have an option for encryption. Use it. Don't lose it. Thanks for listening today. Really appreciate it. And I hope to see you in the next video very soon. Bye.